Tuned in. Good morning. I see that we are now streaming live. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. We are going to allow people time to get in. It is always wonderful to see so many faces joining us on our weekly morning coffee calls. My name is Peyton Kerr, founder, CEO, and president of the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. And we welcome you back this week for another edition, our 9th edition now of Morning Coffee. On behalf of the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, where we are committed to empowering a generation of well Black women and families and communities and all who support us. I'm here today with our FFBWW team. Raise your hand, teams. Woo! On this beautiful sunny Wednesday morning, and with my co-host, Aaliyah Stevenson, Chief Programs Officer for the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, and all of our folks who run our shows on the back end every week. We're so grateful for such a committed, talented team at the Foundation. We're also here with 3 special guests this morning who I will introduce shortly. Nichelle Nichols, let me flip this over. Nichelle Nichols, so I can get that long title right, Nichelle. The Executive Director of the Madison Metropolitan School District Office of Equity, Partnerships, and Engagement. Muldrow, Vice President of the Madison Metropolitan School District Board of Education, among other things, and Mr. Percy Brown, Director of Equity and Student Achievement of the Middleton's Cross Plains Area School District. Thank you all for joining us on relatively short notice this week as we decided to turn our attention to our young people, which we know is our first priority. And today, this morning, I'm feeling hypersensitive about our young people being our first priority, which they always are. And so this is a very timely conversation as we talk about race, education, and the future of our youth. And of course, we're happy to see so many faces joining us here on Zoom and on Facebook Live. But first, each week, before we get started on our call, we acknowledge a few area businesses. And I'm really excited to have Aaliyah talk about the young entrepreneurs who we are highlighting today and whose information we will drop in the chat.
Yes, perfect timing for us to highlight our very talented youth entrepreneurs, artists, individuals who have been commissioned to put up beautiful, expressive, and timely artwork around social and racial justice on our Madison downtown billboards, which if anybody hasn't had the opportunity to walk down State Street and the surrounding streets, it's probably one of the most beautiful sights as someone here who grew up in Madison has had the honor of seeing. So these 2 incredible, talented artists are Amira Kerr, who has Amiradescent Art. I will put her Instagram link in there so you can see her incredible talent, as well as Danielle Milky Art. And again, I will put her Instagram name in there so you can search and look at their absolutely incredible talent.
Yes, and Amira happens to be my child, so I'm very, very proud of her. She took a step out on faith and inspiration this year to launch her art business and has been commissioned along with Danielle to do many of the murals downtown on and off State Street, and it's quite beautiful. So we do encourage you to continue going downtown to admire the work of young artists. Now, as I sit here, I realize that I printed off the not so updated version of the questions that I sent out to you all. So I'm gonna lean on you, Aaliyah, if I sent you the correct version. But first, for Nichelle, for Percy, for Ali, and for everyone listening, the conversation about our youth is really extra important right now as we all are in the midst of this triple pandemic, right? So not just COVID-19, but pre-existing inequities, racial inequalities, systemic racism, layered with police killings of Black people, and the upheaval and unrest that is happening in our community and across the country, much of it necessary in order to bring change. This amidst the ongoing efforts to reform and transform education in our country, in our community, and the years-long work of really bringing equity to the center of what we do in education. That's the backdrop of what we're all dealing with continuously, daily. We know you're steeped in this work, that equity is embedded in who you are and what you do, in the midst of also running entire systems and how equity looks for every student, you know, because some people think that equity is about one group or one thing, but equity is universal. And so you're leading it specifically for underserved populations and for everyone. Our youth take center stage in this conversation. What can you say to us right now about the condition? Well, first, I want to ask you all a question that's pressing on the minds of parents with COVID-19 and with plans for how schools will reopen this fall. I don't think I have a clear understanding yet of what is happening. So let's speak to that very immediate issue. What can we expect? Ali, Board of Education President, Vice President for Madison Metropolitan School District, Co-Executive Director of GSAFE, host of Public Affair show on WORT, Humanitarian Award honoree for our city, LGBTQ advocate, mother of two. What can we expect, Vice President of the board, for how we will return to school this fall?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's so great to be here with y'all and to get to participate in this conversation. I think this is a really important question to start out with. And I think the obvious answer to this question is we closed schools in March before a single person had died in Wisconsin of COVID-19. Over 800 people have perished as a reality of this pandemic. 800 people have not died for any singular reason in Wisconsin since 1918, when a little over 8,000 people died to the last pandemic our community experienced. So if we closed school when no one had died, there's no way that we would open school at a time when about 8.5 people die every single day. And we are seeing a surge. So the question that people want to ask is, when is school going to open? And I have to tell folks over and over again, that's not the right question. The question is, when will we contain and eliminate COVID-19, right? And when we do that, and it's safe for our young people to be in our schools, then our schools will reopen rapidly. And we've been working to recover from, this time period. The entire time we've been out of schools. But we have to prioritize the well-being and health of our community. And I think it's a really important time to talk about the roles that families and parents play in their children's education. I think one of the things we need to be saying as educators right now is the most important thing you can be right now is a parent. You're all your kid has. And we have to acknowledge that that is the shifting reality that we are navigating as educators.
Absolutely. So we've seen surveys go out about options. Can you speak, you and Nichelle perhaps, and then we'll get to Middleton Public Schools, about the options? What is it looking like we're landing closer to, or is that still being decided?
Yeah, so we are starting the first quarter online. So it'll be entirely virtual learning for the first 9 weeks of school. And then, we have prepped 3 options, which is an entirely virtual academic year, and a hybrid year, which is a mixture of virtual learning and in-person or outdoor or a variety of other educational options. And then we have, what it looks like to return full scale to our schools. And so each of those options is being prepared with health and safety at the center. And then ultimately how to create the most supportive educational experiences for 27,000 children.
27,000 children. I'm going to ask you, Nichelle, to weigh in on that, and just let me introduce you, which I skipped unintentionally. Nichelle, as well as Ali and Percy, have grown up in Madison. Some are native to Madison, some have lived here their entire lives. So these are Madisonians, right, who have grown into leadership, who were reared in this community and are now serving and leading in powerful ways. Nichelle is presently the Executive Director of the MMSD Office of Equity, Partnerships, and engagement, where she also oversees family, youth, and community engagement and partnerships. She is a 1987 graduate of West High School and has led many leadership roles in our community over the last, Nichelle, 30 years, including leadership at Family Enhancement, the Community Action Coalition, and the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County. She is a 2019 YWCA Woman of Distinction honoree and the mom of 4 sons who have attended Madison Public Schools. Nichelle, what can you tell us about preparations for this fall for our students?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and hey to everybody. And thank you to our amazing board member, Ollie Muldrow. Like, I was listening to you, Ollie, you got it down. So let me just add a little bit more from the inside view in terms of what the district is planning. First, I want to acknowledge that we did send out a survey in early June. This was before the options survey, okay? It was literally sent out around what have been people's experiences with the kind of the crisis response version of virtual learning. And we got responses from our families. We also did some focus groups that included students and staff. And what we heard pretty loud and clear was that, particularly from families, to Ali's point, they're playing such an active role of being almost like the classroom assistant, that they needed a better sense of what are the expectations for them, what are the expectations of teachers, so that they can better support their students as learners. We heard feedback about there were too many technology platforms to manage, especially when you are a parent of multiple children and every platform has its own password. And so they were really asking us to streamline. Parents of elementary school children seem to have a better experience with those teachers holding like daily or multiple times a week Zoom meetings that really engaged the kids and kept a sense of community. But what we heard loud and clear as from parents of middle and high school students, that wasn't so much the reality. A lot of our students were experiencing homework assignments just in a Google Classroom, a lot of independent work, and then they would have to initiate if they wanted to have one-on-one time with the teacher. So those were all things that what we heard parents saying needed to be different if we were going to come back with any version of virtual at all. And then I do want to call out for our families who are English language learners, or their students are, our immigrant families. And April was in on one of our stakeholder sessions, parents who have their kids enrolled in DLI. Like, if you're not the parent with the native language, those things were really hard for families to navigate. So I say all that to say, we have taken this feedback very seriously, and we are incorporating what I think will be a better experience for our students and for our families in the virtual platform. We're streamlining technology platforms. We are going to have, I think, clear expectations for our teachers around how they deliver and instruct. And some of those expectations coming back are that we do want teachers to hold what we're calling synchronous class time, meaning you have to be kind of instructing with your class and not just relying on independent work from students and families to navigate on their own. We do want to see our educators connecting with families weekly via email, and we know that families play a critical part in this. Like, you can't really run virtual or a blended model well at all without recognizing families play an active part. So we are also, my department is coming up with some kind of best practices around equity and inclusive focused strategies and steps that educators can take. So we're really trying to make it a better experience. I've seen some stuff on Facebook, Lisa, when we decided to go ahead and announce the virtual reopening, there were some families that I saw on Facebook that were like, good, because I'm not sending my kids anyway, or I'm planning to homeschool, or I don't want any parts of what I just had. And so I think we still have a lot of work to do to support families and help them also navigate this terrain. Which I can't say we didn't do any of that, but I think we have to be much more attentive to that as we come back.
Thank you for that. So as you all can hear, there's many layers of decision-making, many layers of consideration, safety being the first. As a parent, you know, I have one child now left in the school district as my daughter just graduated. And safety is my number one concern. Will he be safe, right? And right now, my assessment is he wouldn't be safe returning physically to school under any circumstances right now. But I also have concerns about virtual learning. You know, he's a rising 8th grader. And as a mom of boys and girls who has raised children and seen how different kids and learning styles respond to different learning modes, I'm not sure how virtual education is really drilling down in the depth and breadth of the experiences that he wants, but I know that's what we have right now. So we'll continue to talk about that, and we'll get around to some equity questions in a moment. Percy Brown, currently the Director of Equity and Student Achievement for Middleton Cross Plains Area School District. He's also Senior Outreach Specialist for the Wisconsin Center for Education Research at the UW-Madison, and an adjunct instructor for Edgewood College in the School of Education. You're a very busy man, Percy. His latest endeavor includes hosting a new video blog series on Madison 365 called Real Talk. In 2014 and 2015, respectively, Percy was awarded the Educator of the Year Award by the 100 Black Men chapter of Madison, and was the recipient of the Urban League of Greater Madison's Presidential Rising Star Award. And he too is from Madison and a West High graduate. Ali is a proud East High grad. There's many West High graduates on this call, so we acknowledge the West Nation, the East Nation, and all nations in between. Percy, how is Middleton approaching current circumstances with COVID-19 and learning?
Let me just begin by saying good morning to everyone who's on this Facebook meeting. And I just want to extend an extreme gratitude and thanks to the foundation for all of the work that you've been doing in the community for the past several years, and for extending an invitation to a brother to be the first male on the show. So I've got to say, I feel so honored to be in this space with you all. I flipped through the screens and I'm seeing names and faces of people that I haven't seen in a while. Chelsea Stockton is in the space, and we went to CDI together, which is now One City Learning. Yes, that's where my education started, you know, where Brother Kaleem is right now at One City. So the roots are deep in Madison, and I'm just honored to be in this space. I'm not sure how much more I can add to what Ali and Nichelle have brought forth, right? Because one thing that's been going on is our superintendents across Dane County have been in true collaboration and have been really working to be in alignment in terms of how we are going to proceed with the start of the school year. And I do believe Madison announced that they will go virtual for the first quarter, and then assess somewhere in between the beginning and the end of first quarter to see if we can make adjustments based on where the Dane County Forward plan is. And Middleton is lock and step with that process. So we will be starting virtually first quarter, you know, and we're learning as we go. And we're trying to adjust and build systems of support to meet the online demands, right? Which is a fiasco in itself, but even in addition to the education for our students who are free and reduced lunch, you know, ensuring that those mechanisms are also in place to make sure our kids are getting, you know, proper nutrition, because for some of our families, you know, that those 2 meals are all they may get for some of our families, and that's our reality. So that's equally important to make sure that those things are taking place. You know, there are always going to be issues and challenges with online. You know, we have to ensure that all of our students have access to technology. We've got to deal with like spectrum to ensure that, you know, all of our students have access to Wi-Fi, and, you know, that's public, you know, having to deal with the private sector, you know, because we've had some families that weren't able to pay their, you know, their cable bill or internet bill for a couple of months. And, you know, Spectrum showed some grace, but then they shut it down. And then the district, you know, we're shifting resources to ensure that all of our kids have that access. And the benefit to Middleton is, you know, our percentages of students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged is not as high as Madison, right? We're dealing with like 18% compared to over 50% in Madison. So that changes the challenge by district. And, you know, and we're probably a bit more well-resourced than Madison. So that affords us some advantages, although there's a lot of disadvantages to being in a community like that, right? Because we also have our opportunity hoarders who know how to get to the power structure and list their demands, but we got to keep that balance in the conversation. But, you know, in this, right, in this pandemic, you know, one thing that I've been putting into the space with my colleagues and also my homie Rainey Briggs, who's from the south side of Madison, who works out here with me, you know, we've really been saying, look here, we were able to shift on a dime March 13th, literally within a week, right, because of this pandemic or this crisis. We were able to shift and do our best, right, to meet the needs of kids in less than 2 weeks, right? Yeah. And you talked about a triple pandemic or crisis. You know, people of dark skin that have been in America since 1619 have been in a crisis and pandemic for 400 years, right? And when you think about our education, and that it was not afforded to us for 246 years because we were enslaved, and then followed by 100+ years of Jim Crow, where we had separate and unequal educational opportunities. You know, I've been saying, look here, you know, we were able to shift because of this crisis. Why can't we make this same shift and understand that we have a debt to pay to people who identify as Black or African American and other disenfranchised groups? So we have to keep that front and center, right? Even though we have to learn as we go with online, but how can we use that shift to then shift to do what we need to do for historically disenfranchised kids, but in the same breath, use innovation to fundamentally and radically change what we're teaching in schools, right? Because if we can do it
that's right, Percy.
Then we can do it for our disenfranchised students. So that's kind of what we've been bringing into the space. You know, and I know those conversations are happening in Madison because they've got strong leadership. You've hired Brother Jenkins, who's my frat brother. So, you know, I'm excited about the new leadership in Madison. The board is rock solid, you know, and I'm just thankful, though, that we've got the Dane County Equity Consortium, where all of the districts across Dane County are finding space monthly for about 3 or 4 hours a month to dig deeper into this issue and work collaboratively so that we can address inequities across the county, right? Because we have kids that are transient. We got kids that'll go from Sun Prairie to Middleton, right? Or from Oregon to Madison. And if we're not working together, we're going to continue to allow those inequities to be pervasive and perpetuate itself, and we'll keep missing the mark for our kids, you know? So there's a lot going on, but the more we're aligned and working together, that gives us the best shot to continue to make this shift and get better in this new reality. We don't know when we're going to come back to being in the buildings, but we got to continue to move forward in the best way that we can, but also be innovative and keep our most historically disenfranchised students at the center of what we're doing.
Percy, you kind of segued us into the crux of what we came on this call to talk about today. And Aaliyah, I know I asked you to go to number 2, but I'm going to skip that and go to that next. You know, when you talk about education and you really bring equity and inequity to the center, that is the big conversation of the moment. It's been the moment for African-American people, as you said, for over 400 years, and from the dawn of free public education in the United States, which has not always been the case. I don't know if all Americans know that once upon a time in the United States, education was not free and accessible to all. It was available to those who could afford it. and that coming out of slavery, it was actually free Black people who demanded free public education. So our community really started the conversation about mass free public education. Our first preoccupation when we left chains was to educate our children and to establish free schools with our own pennies in this country. And it picked up as a national concern, where then everyone wanted to demand free public education. And I took a class at the UW-Madison years ago. I'm a UW alum, and Guy Michael Foltz was a professor who has written an incredible almanac of the history of Black education in the United States. And he chronicles the struggle and the fight of free Black folks coming out of slavery, demanding public education and willing to build their own schools in the midst of segregation, but they were going to do it anyway, right, with no money. And then move forward, as you said, through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights Movement. I'm the product. Most Black folks on this call are the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of folks who grew up in segregated United States, who went to segregated schools. My parents, one generation above me, went to segregated schools in Richmond, Virginia. My parents grew up where they could walk on one side of the street or not the other. My parents grew up with signs that said whites only. This is not an old conversation. This is one generation removed. So we know that the history of education is a racialized one that has been steeped in conflict. We know that self-determination and the fight for educational equity is old, and we're still talking about it. We haven't achieved it in 2020 in the modern world. So with that, and understanding here in Wisconsin, the disparate outcomes for Black students, well documented. 23 reports have documented various disparities, including our educational achievement gap, which we rank among the highest in the nation for educational achievement gap, and disparities, which is longstanding. We know that our reading and math scores for third graders aren't where we want them to be, even though we've seen progress over time. We see lagging graduation rates, college-going rates, layered by the overrepresentation of Black and brown and poor youth in our criminal justice system. All of this, which is part of the movement for change that we all see happening in our community around us. How do we change this, Ali? How do we make education revolutionary and uproot systemic racism from our public schools?
I think that part of changing a system like the system we have is acknowledging that the system we have was built, right? And so oftentimes we think of the system as kind of an abstract thing that has always existed, versus, you know, a system that was put together pretty meticulously in terms of advantaging certain people and disadvantaging other people. I also think when you look back to phenomena of slavery or phenomena of Jim Crow, embedded within those phenomena is an incredible campaign to discredit the Black intellect. And I tell folks all the time, I hate when people say white supremacy, right? Because there's no such thing as white supremacy. There is the mythology of white supremacy. But one thing that's really important to understand is if white people were superior, they would not need racism. They would outcompete, right? So racism is there to keep mediocre folks in positions that they don't deserve to be in. And when you talk about anti-racism, you're threatening that system, right? You're saying, hey, we want an even playing field for all children to develop intellectually, and we want to uplift the intellect of all children. And we haven't seen the real sincere integration of academia, right? Because if we were really integrating schools, we would have started with teachers, right? We didn't. We started with children, and children don't have any power to shape their educational system. And so we are still working towards a space in which we are integrating academia, and there's an incredible resistance to integrating academia, to making sure that we're recognizing the brilliance and the intelligence and the creativity of the Black community. Because we've seen what happens when you create a level playing field in other areas of our world, right? When you integrate baseball, 50 years later, the teams look really different. And that would be the exact same thing that would happen if you integrated physics, right? All of a sudden, the executive of the organization is gonna be different. So there are people who have a vested interest in safeguarding an unfair advantage. And we are talking about making space for folks who have historically not had opportunities to have opportunities. And that means the folks who have too much and, you know, are the guardians of why everybody else has too little, are threatened by that. Not because they won't have enough, but because they will no longer have too much. And so when we're talking about what has happened to Black children, there's been a really strategic campaign to blame Black children, right? Even when we say achievement gap, the onus becomes the child. Why aren't you achieving? Now, when we say discipline gap, right, the behavior we're talking about is the adult behavior. Why is it you're so much more interested in correcting my child, sending my kid out of class, suspending my child, than teaching my kid grammar, right? Because you can't, you know, we can't act surprised that a student is struggling in school if when the teacher is teaching basic concepts of math, our kiddo is sitting in the hallway, right? And that is a staple of every elementary school in Madison, right? And so there are some real accountability issues we have to address in terms of, you know, making sure folks are held responsible for educating our young people. And there are issues of discrimination, right? Making people accountable for inappropriate behavior or trends towards our kids, which we have never been able to do as a community, right? So there are some real incredible things that need to be done, but a system that was built can be changed, right? And we are far more creative than the people who have oppressed us. And even without access to robust opportunity in education, Black people created America's only original art forms, right? So you got some of the most brilliant people in the world, some of the most resilient people in the world, demanding that their children be taken care of and provided for, and that when we pay taxes, that those taxes go to our education, our protection, and our basic needs and rights and dignity being uplifted. And that fight is long and hard, but worthwhile.
Yes, Percy, can you, how do we change this? How do we change inequity? How do we make education revolutionary? How do we uproot racism from education in America and here in Madison, Wisconsin?
I got to give a shout out to another brother from 30 Ash Street who is a graduate of Morehouse College, Gus Doyle. What's up, my brother? How you feeling, man? You know, and here's what's so crazy. You know, this brother is on the line, and, you know, Ali was talking about the Brown decision, right? 1984, you know, Betty Franklin Hammonds, Richard Harris, and other local Black civil rights activists filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education and said that some of the schools in Madison were racially segregated because of housing patterns, right? You know, the redlining that took place. And because of that desegregation effort, you know, Gus and I, you know, met for the first time, man, and it was a friendship that turned into a brotherhood. And I think has been, you know, beneficial to the both of us and the friends that we've had along the way that has gotten us to where we are. So I'm just appreciative of that, but trying to give you context, right? 30 years after the decision, you know, this liberal progressive community was dealing with a racist history, right? But let me just hit 1954, and then I'm going to be a little more philosophical in my answer and probably a bit radical. You know, 1954, right? Brown was that huge decision that desegregated schools. And in 1954, a lot of people don't know that college enrollment in the Black community was up 2,500%. So that shows you, to your point, Lisa, that our community valued education. Black Americans in 1954 paid their mortgages on time more so than any other racial group in the nation. So we were financially responsible. We also had $15 billion of annual spending power. And in 1954, that would have made us 10th or 11th in terms of economic power if we were our own nation. Getting back to Ali's point around this mythology of white supremacy. So what that court decision did was it tore up our educational and economic infrastructure, right? Because as soon as Woolworths and Sears Roebuck opened up their doors, we no longer had to deal with getting the secondhand stuff. So boom, our dollar left the community, and those businesses did not reinvest those dollars back into our communities, nor did they give us jobs. On the school tip, forced our kids into those schools with folks that hated us and did not want us there, but did not allow the teachers to come in either. So the dynamic was thousands of Black teachers losing their jobs while Black children were sent into hostile environments. My dad, my aunt, my dad's oldest sister, was the first to integrate Rosedale Consolidated High School in the Mississippi Delta in 1966. My dad came the following year, right? You know, he couldn't play high school basketball because the neighboring teams basically said, you bring that N-word up in this space, he's not gonna make it home alive, right? Or having to always sit in the cafeteria at a table by himself, or in the assembly sitting in the back, the only one in the row, because white folks just would not sit by them. Or the day after Dr. King got assassinated, he walks into the all-white classroom, and on the blackboard it said, I'm glad that N-word is dead, and the teacher left it up there all day, right? So we sent our children into hostile environments, then bring in the teachers that look like them, forcing them a whitewashed curriculum, which they are not able to access who they are, which is now where I'm going to be a bit philosophical in terms of what needs to happen. We got some hard choices to make. You know, we can continue to move forward with some form of interracial cooperation, or we need to rethink our own position and think radically, right? But I think there are some things where we need to start with. In order for our children to access STEM or other forms of academia, it starts with knowledge of self. We have to do a better job of making sure that we are instilling in our kids who we are, which gets to Nick Cannon. Nick Cannon said some things that tore up the power system, and Viacom, CBS fired him. And he said some things, right? He said, you know, white folks are savages. And if you go back and look at the truth of American history, that's how they treated us, like savages, although we were deemed as the ones that are savages. And what are you talking about, Percy? You know, the fact that these slave masters could truly view us as less than human, but then at any given day, time, or night, go into the slave cabins and take our women and repeatedly rape them. It's some twisted psychological crap that I don't understand, right? And the lynchings that happen on Sunday afternoons, announced in white churches, you know, police officers are there. And when those lynchings were over, you know, a lot of people will cut off body parts and keep them as souvenirs, right? So the brother was speaking truth, right? But he also was kind of getting at this idea of, are we really Black or African American, right? And what you got to do is just go to the US Census and see how they define Black or African American, and then look at how they define white, Asian, Pacific Islander, and you will see something starkly different in terms of how they identify us. And we have to unpack what that really is. Because the bottom line is we got to go back to our roots. We've got to understand that we are from Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is all of Africa, right? Africanus is some Roman dude that changed the name, right? The Atlantic Ocean was once called the Ethiopian Ocean. And that's the history that we have to reconnect to. We have to reconnect to this idea of Ma'at, which is ancient Kemetic, right? Which is the roots of who we are as a people. And Ma'at is counter to patriarchy. It's a matriarchal philosophy and way of being, and that's who we are as a people. But America is patriarchal, which goes against who we are at the core of our soul. And Ma'at is about truth, righteousness, and justice. So we got to go back to our roots. And then the last thing, we need to read the Bible as if it was our history, because it is our history. And if you understand the genealogy of the Bible, you will understand that we are God's choice. And once we figure that out, we will find our rightful place in this world, and everything else won't even matter, because we will be able to take our own destiny into our own hands, and it won't matter whether the schools are not going to be willing to shift. And we've got talent right here in our own communities, but we got to believe that if we engage in group economics and believe in the power that we have, if we can come together, we can forge our own future. We can look to rebuild our own educational and economic infrastructures. You know, white Americans for the first time ever are actually awake and acknowledge the fact that racial and ethnic discrimination is real and alive. So we have to have that push for reparations, because we gave 246 years of free labor, and that's about $8 to $15 trillion in today's dollars. So America needs to pay what it owes to us. And then after that, it's like, hey, just let us be. Let my people go. And you know, that's philosophical. It might be a bit radical, but that's the world that I live in. Du Bois talks about double consciousness. I have this consciousness that goes back to the motherland, and a lot of times it's in conflict with the work that I'm doing day in and day out in this system, right? Because my system is predominantly white. And it's not to say that white folks can't teach children of color, because they can, right? But they have to reshift their thinking. They've got to unpack and unlearn the social engineering that they've been hoodwinked and bamboozled. And they've got to unpack that, and they got to be willing to bring truth into what we teach, bring the counter narrative. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. The Taínos people were already here. So bring that story into the space. Tell the truth about the fact that the people from the motherland was already over here thousands of years before Columbus even thought about building a ship, because we had ships. And you can look at the Olmec civilization, right? So we have to, and I'm gonna shut up, like Lawrence Fishburne said at the end of school days, wake up.
Yeah, so
Percy, that's all I got.
You're speaking to so many layers, and I've been scribbling notes on my paper, because we know that transforming systems starts with transforming people. We often depersonalize systems as if they act independently. They're this amorphous, ambiguous thing that just has always existed, but systems are built and engineered by people. The decisions of real people every day that set in motion a course of action that is not ambiguous, that is not mysterious, that is not, you know, a gray area. We can look through the trail of history to see facts and patterns. I get frustrated when people say, well, how did it come to be? Crack a book, read the history. This is not something that we woke up to. It's not a natural state of being. This was engineered by people, and that is where the change begins, is admitting and acknowledging truth, wrongdoing, telling correct history, and deciding, because we are living in a multiracial, interracial society. We've chosen that somehow by force. Mostly we've chosen that by force. The interracial, multiracial environment that we now have in America had to be forced through laws, because people didn't naturally decide that they wanted it. The powers that be did not on their own arrive to the conclusion that we needed to be truly a United States of people united with equal rights and equal opportunity. It was forced by law, and we still are trying to force that by law. I'm a mother of a kindergartner, my son, when he entered kindergarten in this city, and this is a pattern that me and many mothers have experienced. Of sending our children well-prepared, well-behaved, already reading, already writing, already speaking, performing above standard in kindergarten, first grade, only to be treated as behavioral problems. So in my son's introduction to public school in Madison, He was often sent into the hallway, which I discovered from other Black mothers who were witnessing this and alarming me to it, at 5 years old, because he was perceived as non-compliant. When he said, I already did that station 2 times. I want to do something else. Can I go to the reading station? Since I've done this thing you've told me to do and I'm finished and I learned it and here's my work that I put in a little box. And because he wouldn't just say, okay, do it again for the 3rd time, though you've mastered it, that was perceived as confrontational, combative, and his 5-year-old little self, a baby, was often sent into the hallway by himself because of this. And it was happening repeatedly until it was brought to me while I'm at work by another Black woman who would walk through the halls of the school to advocate because she knew it was necessary. And to say the least, we had to take attorneys into the school in my son's kindergarten year to get the equity he deserved for being there. And that's not an uncommon experience. That is a common experience.
And Lisa,
and it goes down. Yeah, go ahead.
And it gets back to what you were just talking about, right? America has socially engineered its citizens to see us as criminal, unintelligent, lazy. It's baked into this nation. It's so baked into this nation. Sometimes we think that crap about our own selves, right? So we got our own deconstruction that we have to do, right? But that's why it's still so pervasive, because this nation has still not embraced us as full human beings. And we got teachers that just have that deficit-based mindset, and they've got to be willing to expose themselves to new information to deconstruct those thought processes about us, right? It's deep work. It's deep work.
It's deep work. And I already know that we're going to have a part 2 and a part 3 because we're about 10 minutes out and we are just getting into this discussion. Every point that you all make is bringing up another point, another point. I could talk about my children's experience this past Sunday of being targeted by racialized harassment as young artists downtown in our city by someone who felt they were out of place, should not have been there, that they don't belong downtown in his city on his street, and that what they were doing was offensive enough for him to want to call the police as they painted commissioned paid art. That's another story I'm sure you guys have heard, but this goes through every system, education included. And what we're really talking about is how do we deconstruct white supremacy narrative, white supremacy mindset. As Ollie said, it is unreal, but it has been entrenched in folks so much consciously and unconsciously that when we talk about education, equity and race in education, we have to explore the behaviors of people and how they translate into the behaviors of systems. Nichelle, what can you say about what it will take to change and to make education equal and revolutionary?
Yeah, so there's a couple things, man, there's already so much in the space. I wanna just pick up on a couple of things. Percy and I have talked quite a few times offline and in the networks we belong to around this conflict of working in the system. And I'm be honest with you, sometimes it feels daunting to think about what are the venues and where is the accountability for everyone working in the system who impacts our kids to do this deconstruction, to do this learning, to do the reflection, to continue to have to come back to it, to have to be like always reflecting and changing and honoring, first of all, that our kids and our families already have inherent genius and brilliance, and part of your role is to create the conditions to cultivate it. See, I think part of the issue is not only what folks have not been exposed to in terms of historical accuracies and that learning, but also, like as Percy was saying, there's such a pervasive, subconscious, and sometimes very overt mindset around our kids being the kids that have to be fixed. Our kids are broken. They come from broken families. They have to be served. And when you come with that orientation, you're not going to see the genius. You don't see the funds of assets and knowledge. And so Percy and I have talked long and hard, right, about these roles in school districts. And even when you come up with a strategy around professional learning, right, like being the place where educators can come in, you can expose them to history, you can expose them to classroom pedagogy, you can, like, all these things, the work it takes to convert the unconvinced, the unwilling, is a whole nother thing. So you try to build with your coalition of the willing, right? The people that show up, that are like, I'm down with this, I've been doing some of this learning, I want to be better, I value our kids. You try to build with that, but there is sometimes an accountability piece, because how do you scale that? How do you grow that? And so to me, when we talk about, yes, systems are built by people, people have the ability to revolutionize and change the experiences our kids are having, there also has to be some structural accountability for that. And there's a lot of debate in diversity, equity, and inclusion work on, do you mandate that? Does it work to mandate those kinds of experiences for folks? And so, what we're trying to do right now, we have a sister for the first time in our curriculum and instruction department. We have a sister for the first time in our advanced learning department. These sisters have come in and they are integrating Black models first, anti-racist education into the curriculum and the teacher expectations. So it won't just be professional learning on the side. You need to go to the Race and Equity 101 class. We can offer that too, but it's also going to be integrated in how you show up in a classroom and what curriculum you are interrogating and where you are infusing folks. I think the other thing that we are trying to do is we are trying to reevaluate what we mean by social emotional learning. We are a big fan of Dr. Dina Simmons, who really talks about PBIS, the positive behavior supports in school systems, not being led through an anti-racist folks of color lens. And so she talks about transformative self, and that if you really want to transform a classroom and experience for kids, you recognize their identity. You bring in history. You actually hear from kids how they're experiencing you. So we're working on that as part of the revolution, if you want to say. And then lastly, I would say, our district has come out with a commitment to Black excellence. And the greatest thing that I think we are onto is recognizing in a predominantly white school system that you got to tap into the Black community. You got to bring them in. You have to recognize that there are Black folks as assets that our kids deserve to be in relationship with. And we have to open that door and make it possible. So those are just a few highlights. I know we are at 9:56 and I'm gonna mute because Percy took up so much time, brother Percy. I was about to send you a chat, bro.
I was about to say all of y'all a chat. That's what I was about to say.
Well, people told me that. People told me I was supposed to be a preacher, but I think I sinned too many times, and I'm still repenting daily.
Woo, so here's the thing. Here's the thing, you all. I don't know if our speakers can be on 5 minutes over. Are you able to be, or are you walking into meetings, right? What did you say, Aaliyah? Did you say 5 or did you say 10? 10. Can you go to 9, 10? Let us know.
Yes.
And we hope that folks can hang on with us because there is fire in the chat. There is fire in the chat. I want to ad lib so many things that have been said here, and I want to bring up this thing. What you paint the picture of all three of you, is the struggle for Black parents. As we continuously every day negotiate, do I keep my children in the system or do I create another way to educate my children? I'm a mother who has homeschooled my sons, my two older African-American sons, for several years because I was so distraught by their experience in middle school and the targeting of young Black men as they grow into muscular, tall, deep-voiced human beings, and the perceptions that shift and change at that part of their life and the low expectations that take over from their school systems about their learning and their future. And I've done that, right? And I've advocated for quality public education, but I've also been a leader and an administrator in a revolutionary charter school, right, in our nation's capital that realized that when public education does not serve Black children and they are failing and faltering endlessly, despite pushes and demands to meet their needs, that parents have to have some other way. And that's a very touchy, controversial conversation that continues to go on in this country because the lack of acknowledgement of the challenge of Black parents finding equity and opportunity and fairness in our children's classrooms. Because this stuff comes down to the trajectory of your life. You know, we can speak to young men, young women who we know their dreams were deferred and deterred because of their educational experiences, particularly in districts that are under-resourced in our most distressed communities and neighborhoods across the country, and even here in Madison, in our delicate imbalance of wealth and access based on income and high levels of poverty and all these things, even though we know for us, class doesn't really matter. You can be a child coming from a six-figure, two-parent PhD household and have the same educational outcomes and experiences as a child with, you know, with what's deemed as an unstable, unresourced, low-income family from the most distressed of conditions, much like health disparities, right? Where you can be PhD level Black woman, Black man, and your health outcomes look no differently than a pre-GED woman living in the distressed neighborhood because the common factor is stress. And lack of equal access to opportunity, no matter what your starting point. And so that's what we're dealing with as we talk about education. And there's so many stories. In fact, Aaliyah, you constructed a question that was asked by Laleta G yesterday. Why don't you ask that here? And for our folks listening in, we want you to respond to this question as well. And we're going to acknowledge many of your comments. And I want you all to know also that our Facebook Live audience is asking for parts 2, 3, and 4 of this conversation. So we'll be scheduling that, but go on, Aaliyah.
So I take that nod and that smile as a yes, you'll be back. But Laleta G asked a question, what is one word you would use to describe your school experience? And if you were to read that post and to read the responses, the answers included invisible, oppressive, ignored, unworthy, misunderstood, isolating, unsupportive, marginalized, rough, disrespectful, hurtful. If that is our starting point, what impact will our current pandemics have on the school experience of our youth? If that is our starting point, maybe start off with you, Ali.
I really appreciate this question. My answer to that question was discouraging. I think that was probably the greatest sentiment. And I want to return to something Lisa said because I thought it was so important about you know, her child being sent out for being disruptive. First of all, I want to just acknowledge that that's horrible and incredibly painful, especially because when you see a 5-year-old absorb ideas that they're bad, or that they're not wanted in their classroom, or that they're not really part of the community, it robs them of getting to be a little kid, of getting to enjoy playing at school. And so no kid should experience that. But the other thing I think is really important is that before the behavior education plan happened, we had the student code of conduct. And the #1 reason students were suspended was insubordination, right? So this desire to dominate Black people, right? I would rather dominate you than educate you. I don't want you to be good at critical thinking. I want you to be good at doing what you're told. Those sentiments, those are really historically relevant sentiments. They are things that we have been combating. And so culturally, we're teaching our children to be indomitable, right? It doesn't benefit us to be dominated. And simultaneously, white culture is teaching white folks that their freedom is about interrupting ours, right? I need to be able to attack you on the street, you know, when you're painting something. And that's how I have freedom of speech. You don't have the freedom of speech of painting uninterrupted, but I have the freedom of speech of harassing you while you do it, right? So reconciling this idea that we are all on the same page, we all want everything to work out, and somehow we just keep ending up with racism, is something that we really have to deep dive and challenge ourselves to do the work around. I think the other thing in looking to what folks were saying is, you know, that's the way people experience learning at school. And oftentimes when we talk about the Black community, we discredit the Black family. But I actually think one of the things that will surprise us when we return to school is how much Black children have benefited from being with their families, from having their grandmother read to them, from having spaces that are celebratory of who they are. And so the stereotype that Black children in their homes are gonna be traumatized and aren't gonna be connected to learning, I think that there's a good argument that Black students will have greater opportunities to learning at home than they have had in our schools, that they will be punished less frequently at home than they are at school, that they will be engaged in who they are more often at home than they are at school. So I think we have to start talking about the benefits of the Black family and the commitment Black people have to learning, where you have a system that gives you all of those words of discouragement and harm. And still Black women are the most likely people in the United States to go to college and graduate, so bah!
Woo, all right, Nichelle, what's your response to that? And let me just plug, my grandmother taught all of her grandchildren how to read before we hit kindergarten, while my parents worked in segregated Richmond, Virginia, self-employed entrepreneur business owners, partly because they wanted to, partly because they had to. Our grandparents took care of us and they taught us and they schooled us at their kitchen table. We were school ready when we hit kindergarten. I want to send that up to Bertha and John Dandridge. All right, Nichelle.
Yeah, I love that point. Thank you, Ali. I feel like I need to carry that back because I feel like the way we're thinking about reopening is that we do think the first 5 to 6 weeks has to be intentional on community building, on relationship building, on, you know, what I just talked about, kind of taking a more transformative cell approach that leads with identity and history and youth voice. But I also think there's still a belief that we need to help accelerate kids' experiences. I think there is probably some unpacking we still need to do around how we think our kids have experienced being out. You know, how they advantaged to come back because their families are actually a stronger anchor for them than maybe coming back into a school building. So I appreciate this question because I think we need to continue to challenge our assumptions about how our students are going to show up and what's going to be important for them. And yeah, so the best I've got right now is that I need to take that back and help keep pushing that on the inside.
Aaliyah, give us some insights from the chat, and then we're going to ask each one of our wonderful guests who are already in demand for, again, part 2, 3, and 4. We're going to schedule those quickly. We want to hear what folks are saying in the chat about their school experiences, about any other commentary they've had. And then we're going to ask you for your wrap-up comments.
Well, it's impossible to summarize, but I do want to say, despite this national concern around the achievement gap, when you read these comments, you're seeing people that are from here having these very differential experiences. Corinda talked about being from Chicago and having a very supportive experience where the teachers looked like her and it was reflected. So there is something to be said about something different. There's things people saying like, it felt like a social experiment to be in the schools here. And then of course, there's just the comments about needing more of this space to be able to process and to be in community and have these conversations that aren't being had in other places, that aren't as intentional. And then shout out and thank yous to the 3 guests that we have today for being in their positions and standing in the gap and holding all these truths. And also continually to lean in on, as Nichelle said, constantly challenging themselves, listening to the community, bringing it back. There's just an absolute, I can't summarize all of it. It's just really incredible.
And, you know, hopefully we'll save this chat. Make sure we save the chat so we can grab these comments. We'd love to circle back and send them to you all so you can just see the richness of what you generated and inspired today. And thank you, audience, for being so interactive. We just love you all. So just know that. Thank you for being here. In wrapping up, and we want, you know, the 30-second summary of this. And it's off script. You know, I'm thinking about our young people. I'm thinking about their future. And I want to hear from you. What do you envision? You know, what does education look like when we've reached that point where equity is real? And young Black children can walk into spaces called public schools or even private schools, just education, and know that they are valued and that their dreams are protected and supported. What do you say about what that looks like, how we get there, as if our young people were listening, right? The encouragement that they need to hear right now. Percy, how about you start off?
Yeah, I just say, you know, to that question, the words that Laleta put out there, I survey our affinity groups every year, and those words always emerge, every last one of them. And I think at the end of the day, you know, for interracial cooperation to really work in our schools, it really is just love. If all of our educators could love our Black and brown children as if they were their own, you know, they would never give up. They would see the strengths, no matter how the kid comes in or what, regardless of what they say, they're not going to give up on that kid, and they will do whatever is required to ensure their success. So I would just say, love them as if they were your own, because you would stop the spirit murdering that Bettina Love speaks of.
Ali.
I think that our young people have to know that in spite of a system that wasn't designed to serve them, their brilliance is beyond measure. And, you know, as a person who's from Madison, I was born here in 1987. I tell folks all the time, this is the fight that chose me, not the fight that I chose. You are born into a place that doesn't serve you because you were born to change it. And we've got a system of education that wants you to fit into the world as is. And you have every right to expand your learning in a way that allows you to change the world, to alter the course of history. You're the best is yet to come, y'all. We're looking forward to you.
Oh, yes, Nichelle.
And I would say, and this is coming also as a parent who's had a couple of my sons need to go into an alternative space to complete their MMSD experience. And guess what? For every young person who believes that because they've had a certain experience and it hasn't gone well, that they've internalized that to believe, they're not genius, they're not brilliant, they're not talented. don't buy it. Because guess what? The same kids who may not be showing up academically or behaviorally in a school in a particular way or a class are leaders in other spaces, are leaders in their families, are leaders in their churches, are leaders out on the basketball court, are doing art. Like, I just want us to stop defining the trajectory and the fullness of who our kids are based on like a singular academic conversation. And this is not saying the academic experience isn't important and we got to do better. But daggone it, Percy, okay, I just got to say this. I didn't graduate with the highest GPA. I was non-compliant with some of my teachers. Guess what? But I knew I had something in me that knew you ain't defining where I'm going.
That's right.
You know, and so, but I came from a family that also helped reinforce that, even though I was challenging. But we have to be able to lift our kids up and say, in spite of, keep resisting. I love Ali's point because, daggone it, school is one chapter. It's not the whole thing. And we have to fight to make it better. But at the end of the day, like, let's stop defining our kids just based on their MAP scores, just based on this data point. Okay, I got to be done. Okay, anyway, I would say our kids we have to believe that in our kids. We have to stop talking about them when they're out protesting and out exercising their leadership, their voice, and like characterizing them like they're doing something wrong. No, we should be applauding when we see our young people stepping up, like painting murals, all of it. We need to like celebrate what is coming up and out of them and continue to nurture that. So anyway, I love our young people, and I'm gonna keep on fighting up in this system as best as I can. Pray for a sister.
I wanna take my hat off again and thanking Ali, Percy, and Nichelle for being here. We are with you as a community. We understand the complexity of being revolutionaries within systems. Sometimes as Black folks, as folks of color, leading in institutions, we get flack, we get called bourgeois, we get called agents of the system. People don't understand that we gotta be in systems to transform systems. And there's a place for people to operate outside of systems to do that piece. We all have positions, positioning, and roles to play in every domain. And we know the complexities of trying to transform systems from the inside out. So we honor you, we acknowledge you, we stand with you, and we urge you to focus on self-care constantly, because we know the burdens and the triumphs that you carry. So we want to thank you for being here today. We're going to invite you back again. We want to remind folks out there, yes, let's clap it up and give them some love, everybody. Let's clap it up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We want to remind our guests today that Black Women's Wellness Day season is here. We want to remind you to go out. If you pop that in the chat, Aaliyah, registration is live for our 12th annual Black Women's Wellness Day event. We are going virtual this year, 2-day transformation experience. Get your tickets, pass the word. And remember our parting words: know thyself, love thyself, heal thyself. Our wellness and our freedom starts with us, and we have the power. Go out, protect our youth, lift our youth up, defend our youth, and be well until we return next week. Thank you. Have a great day.
Peace and love, everybody.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Bye-bye.